Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Divorce Unplugged podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, Nicole Cox, and you probably know me on socials as the Family Law Liaison. And then my co-host.
Hi, everybody. Keegan Burke. You may know me on socials as Divorceology. I'll do my disclaimer real quick. Not an attorney, not lawyering. This isn't legal advice. This is a conversation. And so really want to make sure you understand that before we get started.
Right, exactly. And so my disclaimer for everyone is, yes, I am an attorney. I am not your attorney, and this is not legal advice today. It's just raw conversation.
Exactly. So we're going to do another Q&A today because we get so many questions from all over the country. And we feel like when there's an opportunity for addressing those questions, it's always helpful because these are the topics that people want to hear about. They want to better understand. And we're getting questions from individuals who are representing themselves. We're getting questions from lawyers who are dealing with these topics with their clients, asking us to talk about it. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to answer your questions, and hopefully it's helpful for those that have asked these questions.
Right.
All right, so the first one is going to be a hot button for you, I know, and
You already.
we can probably guess who asked this question or the sex or gender of this person. But the first question is, why are high conflict moms labeled protective and high conflict dads labeled dangerous? I'll let you answer first, and then I'll give my opinion.
Yes, you definitely hit me with quite a slider or some sort of a random ball conversation. Yeah, no, I think the thing about this is it's difficult for me because obviously I coach women, right? So, high conflict moms labeled protective. I think sometimes maybe women do go a little bit overboard to be protective, but I also don't think being a protective mom is a bad thing in some scenarios, right? But I do think what you're saying is they like to stir up situations, and it might even be a strategy to get a dad involved in a conversation um, and start an issue. And because they're sitting there looking for it. And I'm not saying that my moms are high conflict protective, trying to drag people into the high conflict scenarios. And dangerous has so many different levels when we're talking about high conflict dads. Okay. So I see high conflict dads that are really just, I'm going to use the term, like, not narcissist, because we know we don't like that, but uses a lot of coercive control. Okay. Maybe has like that sort of demeanor. Does it mean that they're dangerous? I think at the point that they become dangerous, and I have seen so many examples, is when they're now threatening and they're harmful to the health and well-being of the children and to the mother. Now, when they start threatening, I have seen clients, in my own personal experience, okay, my own father was getting death threats. That's a dangerous, coercively controlling father. So
Sure.
it comes in so many different levels. And I'm really trying to look at this from everybody's standpoint. We all know that I have a bit of a bias for moms. And so to say that a protective mom is causing conflict is hard for me. But at the same time, I'm willing to keep my eyes open and say, everyone has a part in it, and never look like you're being combative, mutually combative.
Yeah, and so I have a couple thoughts on this. And so the first one that I think about is, the I think it falls into some level of gender norms and what, we tend to experience when a woman takes a protective stance. It's okay, right? It is labeled protective, or if her conflict is arguably to protect the children, that's generally what she's given. And a dad who's, creating conflict or is combative or argumentative or disagreeable, that becomes a dangerous consideration or definition of him. And I do think that it happens often. And I think that it's generally it's pretty normal because of the difference between a man and a woman, right? The woman in a high conflict situation is probably at more risk of danger than a man is in a high conflict conversation. But what
Right.
happens when we only think through that lens is we ignore the impact on the kids. We ignore the fact that the dad may be disagreeable to a particular topic or the mom may be disagreeable to a particular topic, and neither of them are necessarily dangerous or protective. They're opinionated and they're trying to
Oh, I
drive
love that.
an argument that they feel is best. And the difficult part in divorce or custody matters is
Opinionated.
you're no longer making joint decisions. These decisions now are in their own silos and you're operating in your own space. And my challenge is as a man, and tend to work with men more than women, I see it all too often that the mom gets a pass on being protective while being the instigator of conflict, right? Being the controlling party around the kids, right? The control affects people in different parts of the
Right.
process. But in this particular situation, I just feel like it's somewhat normal for everybody conceptually, even outside of divorce, to think as men as the big bad dangerous guy and the woman the
Right.
soft protective one. But to that end, it is exactly why when we coach our people and or we think about how we manage this ourselves, you need to ensure that if there is conflict, you're managing it properly, you understand what the perceptions might be, all of the things that we talk about on all of our other episodes, because I think this is something that everybody should be aware of, whether you're a man or a woman. What category could you more likely than not fall into
Fall
and work
into when you're
accordingly?
in court.
Yep.
That's a very good yes, that's a very good point, and when you said opinionated, exactly, I mean, there are situations with a lot of my clients that somebody's just an opinionated parent, but I don't think the person's actually dangerous, but then
Right.
there are certain scenarios where there is a dangerous person, and then I think that that just takes it to a whole whole 'nother level.
Totally agree. Totally
Yeah.
agree. All right. So I think we kind of got off to a interesting start.
I know, you
Um,
did throw me off there for a
yeah.
minute. I'm like, "Okay."
All right. So I actually
But wait,
like
I've
this
got
one.
one more thing to say.
Yeah. Go.
But what if we don't have a protective mother? I mean, I think that there's just an innate feeling for moms to want to be protective, and I think that you pointed out, I think it's okay sometimes for them to be protective and to really be concerned if there's something going on, and then other times, it's overboard.
Yeah, I would say that's the case for man or a woman, right? Like I think men are just as capable. I think the stereotype is that women are more
More protective.
protective, and so they get the pass to
Right.
be maybe a little more protective or labeled that. When if we really looked at the facts or the situation, it probably isn't always going to fall within the label,
Yeah,
right?
that's fair.
So
No,
I
you're
actually really like this next one, because we see it on socials and you hear about it all the time, and it is a topic that I think is very real and very dangerous, particularly for men. But do lawyers encourage false allegations behind the scenes to gain leverage, and how common is it really? Now, my opinion is this: yes, lawyers absolutely recognize the leverage that false allegations bring to their case to the benefit of their client. Now, I'm going to take the position that it's probably optimistic that most attorneys would not just outright recommend to their clients
you
to
can't.
make false allegations, right?
Yes, you cannot.
But I have been privy to enough conversations and around the courtrooms enough to know that if it's a wobbler, right, you're going to lean on well, I'm scared or I'm abused or he yelled or she yelled or something that would really kind of give your argument of abuse, particularly abuse, those allegations some weight because so often that's the tipping point in the case, right? That's where if the court's got to make a decision weighted one way or the other, it's an abuse element that's going to drive, does one parent get primary or does the other?
Do you know what I think is interesting? What I've seen with my clients, and this might be a little bit off topic, but I'm watching the court systems not care about domestic violence at all anymore. In fact, I have seen with some of my clients, people, the other party, go and take random domestic violence classes, just random, and then that makes them okay. No, that's not even a court ordered class. So I'm actually seeing the absolute opposite. In fact, it's frightening to me what I've seen with my clients and situations because nobody's listening to domestic violence anymore. And that's just what I'm hearing. Because maybe the unfortunate part is it's like the little boy that cried wolf. The people that used it and shouldn't have now ruined it for the people that are really going through it.
Yes, I love that point. It's one we've brought up a couple times, and it's one that I really stand firm on, and that is people that need protection should have it. My issue is too many people use that protection or
Mhm.
argument for it as leverage to gain an advantage in a case. And so it is boy who cried wolf. And now the system, the court, people, lawyers, everybody are stuck in this like vacuum of what's real and what's not. What do we have to care about and what don't we have to care about?
Mhm.
And it makes it really difficult. But it goes back to what we always say, have a coach, document everything,
Right?
mindful of how you behave, how you carry yourself, etc. But I would say this: there are plenty of nasty lawyers out there that will, bend the rules, if you will. So be aware of it. That's it, right? Just be
I
aware
think
of it.
that's absolutely correct. I mean, I've come across a few, maybe a
Yeah.
handful, where I think the problem here is that how do you know if your client is really telling you the truth or not? And what happens, like just happened with somebody I know personally, because my client was right there. When you walk into a mediation and you think that somebody has no money, has no ability, but has money hidden, has assets, all the things, is that your fault? Is it the attorney's fault? Is it if it's your client, I think is what I'm saying. You don't always know if they're telling you the truth. And I think that's a thing when we coach, even as coaches, we have to know that maybe our client's not telling us the truth.
Yeah, I agree with that. I call it carrying the client's water, right? So, they're in it for their billing. They're going to represent whatever interests their clients trying to push forward. Even if in the hallways, they're off the record saying,
Right.
"Hey, I agree with the other party," or "I don't believe what she's saying," but they're going to go into the courtroom and they're going to represent their client to the best of their legal ability,
Because they
and that's
have
the
to.
problem. But this goes back to another topic, right? It's exactly why the system's broken because there's really never accountability for being honest or dishonest,
Right.
rather, um, because contempt creates complications in your cases. Uh, things are never actually referred for perjury.
Mhm.
It's such a cluster of a situation. But it's just something to be aware of and pay attention to, and I think be honest with your attorney. Um, and, I've even had attorneys where, they aren't prepared for how nasty the other side can be or is willing to be. They don't recognize that the person's going to say one thing in the hallway,
Right.
show up in the courtroom and say something completely different.
Right. I've seen that.
So
I've seen that.
now this next question is I'm going to sort of reframe it a little bit. And it falls within this
Because you
protective.
don't want my answer.
No, I do. I do. Uh, Now, it's kind of a twofold question, right? And we've touched on it a little bit. Are restraining orders a good thing, right? Are they a protective measure, and also a legal weapon? And I would say yes, for those that need it, perfectly fine, should be available to those that need it. But I'd be remiss if I did not point out that I think they are absolutely a legal weapon. They are used all the time.
Well, okay, so I'll tell you. So I have a client in California, and somebody used it as a legal weapon. It was a family of the ex used it as a legal weapon against her. So it's an uphill climb to get it removed, right?
Mhm.
So now when she has parenting time, she's being followed by the very family that put the restraining order against her.
Mhm.
So I said, "Well, document and let's go get a restraining order against them." We call it a
Mhm.
DVRO in
Yep.
California. I'm like, I'm done. I mean, so it can be a good and bad thing. In certain situations, I think it's absolutely necessary. And when it just gets ridiculous behavior, or you're being stalked, or you have, 100 million text messages that are threatening your life or your families, I think that you need to do that, especially if there's domestic violence involved. Um, but in other situations, I think it just becomes who's going to put the restraining order on who first,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
yeah.
It
Now it's
does.
just a tit
It
for
is a lot of
tat.
that.
Yeah.
It is a lot of that. It is, I see a lot more um, restraining orders going both ways, right? So if one
Right.
party's going to get one, the other party's going to get one. And
Right.
and listen, I think in a lot of cases where um, it's happening, it's probably the easiest bet because it keeps still the playing field a little bit level to some extent, right? It's like don't impede, don't harass, don't stalk, don't be dangerous, don't do all of these
Yeah.
things. I don't care who you are, but certainly, I just despise the misuse of restraining orders and fear and the leverage that it creates because it really creates a much more difficult experience to manage your case,
Mhm.
for you, but also really for the other party because it's a very, very steep climb
Well,
to
and
get
it's
out of it.
also not handled through family court. So the judge just looks at it and says, "Oh, there is one,"
Mhm.
depending on what state you're in. I mean, I have a mother that I coach, and she has one against her for pretty much no reason, and it stuck, and it shouldn't have, and now she's in a position that's bad, but everybody else in that scenario that put it on her and lied, it was all false allegations, can now bully her with it.
Yeah, yeah. I love don't get me started on
I know.
corresponding witnesses, right? And the weight that shouldn't be given to family and to
Oh,
friends
and it
and
was
to
all family that
collaborators,
messed her up. It was so bad.
right? Yeah. So Um, I will refrain from sharing my experience on that front. Now, I like this one too. So, because it's an interesting question, and it is the rise in abuse allegations during divorce a sign of greater awareness or greater manipulation?
So, just keep wanting to hit me with these, don't you? I think that there's a point where it can be manipulation, and I think when I say this, it's going to sound a little off kilter. Typically, when a woman's really being abused, they are not calling the police constantly. They really aren't, because they're staying there, and we can look at coercive control, and we can talk about narcissistic abuse, but for the most part, um, a woman, and maybe a man too, won't just start calling the police. So that is not manipulation. When they're constantly calling the police for no reason, that's the manipulation piece.
That is an interesting thought.
I mean, right.
Yeah. So let's break it down then, because
Because most abused women, and I have somebody amazing I want to put on our podcast. Most abused women aren't going to call the police right away. They're going to hang in there because they've been groomed. because there's narcissistic abuse, all the things.
Well, yeah, but I would say an even smaller percentage of men are going to call because they're actually being abused, right? I mean,
Right.
how many guys do you know get slapped, hit, pushed around, and they don't respond, and they're certainly not going to call the cops on their spouse, like you know what I mean?
No.
It's like, eh, are they actually at risk for getting beat up by a woman? Probably not. Is it abuse and should they be taking care of it? Yeah, they probably should, but how many men really do it? And I just
And
so
then
it's
does
like,
it fall into the more emotional abuse piece too?
yeah, then that you have that whole piece. But I think on the thing that jumps out at me is these relationships that go on for years, and people argue, right? Maybe that's not abuse, or it gets ugly, maybe one cheated or the other cheated, and now somebody's mad at the other,
Mhm.
or really the only way to get out is to start making allegations of abuse, and we know that that's the easiest path to go get what you want if that's what you're going to do. And so, to your point, I agree that it happens and can be persistent and unreported. But
Mhm.
if they're being abused and it's true abuse, I think that there are signs and there's evidence that it exists on a
What
level
evidence?
that does meet a standard for a court to accept it and should. My problem is all too often it doesn't pop up until the end, and now it's right, witnesses and family and storytelling
I
and
know.
this
Oh, the family and
manufactured fear.
storytelling is craziness. No, I think when it pops up, I'm saying it pops up in the beginning, right before temporary orders. We have photos, we have videos, and there's usually been one arrest, and it's
Yeah,
and often like a neighbor or somebody else is the person that calls. That's
right.
that's the true abuse that I see with my clients.
Yeah, and at the same time, right, we even the pictures, right, because of all the editing capabilities and the storytelling, but like it's not hard. And I say this because I have watched these situations unfold. I know people who have worked through this process. They scratch their face or they punch their arm or they smack their head off the
Right.
wall, call the cops, and because that's how they think they can get out and
Or
they
how about the guy that had his eyes done and they were little tiny, like, laser marks under his
yeah,
eyes and said that she scratched him? I'm like, "Look at the metadata. That guy had that
exactly.
done, like, years before you met him."
Exactly. So, in my opinion, I think that it's probably both. The answer is probably both. There's definitely more awareness for abuse, right? We have to recognize those that need to be protected. But I also think that people have realized that in a flawed system, it's easily abused, it's easily leveraged. And so
Mhm,
I think that it's happening more. And I think that we have more awareness of it too.
mhm, agreed.
Now, I know your answer to this question.
Where
Um,
where are you
should
taking me now?
50 should 50-50 custody be automatic unless proven otherwise? Or does that put or does that risk putting kids in unsafe homes?
You're really just getting me today. So my thing is no, it should not be. I think 50-50 is kind of the fall of the whole family system, court system. But I also believe that both parents need to have contact and be with their kids. But I do think that the 50-50 presumption does put children sometimes into the hands of people that are unsafe. And we've talked about this before, if and unfortunately, like I said, it's mostly fathers, but not all the time. It doesn't have to be. But if a parent is unsafe, they need a supervisor and they don't get 50-50 unsupervised. And I will never not stand behind that.
Yeah, and I'm a big advocate. This is where we definitely disagree. I'm a big advocate that
I know we do.
the presumption should absolutely be 50-50. Now, and I say that because unless proven otherwise is the key element to that point. If there is a situation where it's unsafe, if it is detrimental to the kids, then you should be able to prove it. Um, and I think part of my position on this is maybe utopian, in that it shouldn't take 3 months to get in front of a judge to iron that out, and the problem is in today's world, if you need to get an order, and or put that evidence before a court, it generally takes too long. So if it is a risky situation or you are putting kids in an unsafe situation in
Mhm.
50-50, that's not ideal. And the same thing goes where if it's not unrisky and they're both good parents and the kids are used to seeing both of them and they should have equal time, it shouldn't be taken away from any either side just because there isn't a presumption of it.
Right. And I think where I'm coming from is when you walk into court, there's a presumption of domestic violence, or there already has been. And then a judge says, well, we need another hearing to figure it out. And here's 50-50. And then they're getting unsupervised. So I see your point, but I don't love the 50-50. I just don't.
Yeah, and I hear you, and again, I just feel like all too often the custodial control is attached to control, 1,
Right.
economics, 2, and, this whole the notion that all of a sudden, one day, 2 parents who have been raising a family separate and one just doesn't get equal time on a presumptive basis as the general populace, right?
Okay.
I
And I'm
think that
hearing
should be
you.
standardized.
I'm hearing you. I think that there's a difference between somebody that's definitely been in a family situation. You've both shared the parental responsibilities.
Yeah.
And I can see that. I think when you're talking about younger children coming out immediately of a situation, maybe that's something to look at.
Alright, so next one. This is an interesting one. We've kind of touched on it a couple times, over the last several episodes, but should emotional abuse be treated the same as physical abuse in court?
Okay. And another tough question you're asking me today. It's all of our audience and viewers. Do I think it should be treated the same? I do think that there's a point where there has to be a threshold where emotional abuse and verbal abuse, I can maybe put that into the same bucket, where it raises to the level of physical. I'm not exactly sure where that is, but I do think that there is a point when you can be so verbally abusive, so volatile, so emotionally abusive that that is just as bad, if not worse, than physical.
Yeah, that's a really tough question because I think that I agree with you, and I think it is a difficult question because where do you draw the line, right? And how
Mhm.
do you identify what that line is, right? Because every relationship is different, people's personalities are different,
I mean,
their
I think death
relationships are
threats
different.
is a good place to draw the line.
Well, yeah, I mean that
I've
yeah.
seen it.
Yeah.
I've seen it. I have seen it rise to the level of literally considered domestic violence.
Okay, but here's a good example though, right? And this so I read a series of text messages in another case and one party used the text thread where one person said, you know, I'm done with this, right? I'm not going to put up with this any longer, something along those lines.
Mhm.
And the other side used that as, well, that was a subversion and it was a threat because they were threatening that if I'm done with it, I'm gonna kill you. And it just it like it
Yeah,
was
that's
exaggerated because the intent behind what was said wasn't I'm threatening to kill you or myself or anybody else, but the other side used it. So, you know, I totally agree. Yes, death threats, you know, name calling, persistently
and
putting
just
the other person down. Yeah.
constantly putting the other person down. Waking up to 80 and 90 text messages that is just nothing but, like, just putting you down and putting together some of the worst sentences a human being could hear. It
But
gets to the
here
point whereas then I think it's post-traumatic stress disorder. Now you're inflicting and I looked at intentional infliction of emotional distress. as well, because I think it can rise to that level, which is then still domestic violence and abuse.
Yeah, well, and so I think to be real specific here, right? That example is perfect because it's in writing, easy to use as evidence, easy to
Mhm.
identify, and even if it's not necessarily qualified as a level of abuse, if somebody is doing that and it's brought to court by the other side, you're going to look real bad. It's not going to
Real
help
bad.
your situation. And so if you're doing it, don't. Whether you mean it, and this goes back to the whole coaching thing, right? Don't put anything in writing that you don't want the judge to read.
Right.
Be very mindful about how you interact. But those are things that if it's happening, it's pretty easy to prove. Where I struggle is, oh, he yelled at me or she yelled at me or we argued, name called, and it's just this fugazi, right? It's like, well, we have no understanding. We've never seen behind the curtain. We don't know what your relationship's been like. Maybe you both do it, right?
Right, and
And
there
so
we
I
go
think
with
that's the
mutually
struggle.
combative.
Right.
So
Exactly.
I always tell my clients when I'm coaching, pretty please do not respond to that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I
No, I
think
totally agree.
that, yeah, so we both agree on that, and we can probably end here at that point with this fun question and answer where Keegan really asked me some tough questions today, you guys. And I will be sure for our next question and answer session to be asking him some hard ones. Very
Good.
difficult questions are coming at you.
And I know we have a lot of them, so we'll absolutely be doing more questions and answers. Looking forward to it. Like, subscribe, follow, do all the things. We appreciate all the questions we get. We appreciate all of your time, but
Yes,
thank you to everybody.
we do. Thank you guys. Look forward to seeing you soon.
See you next time.